I was always with my father when he had cancer, but he was ashamed of me. I'm Riley Westbrook. I'm 35. And I learned too late that some betrayals were your last name. Growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, I thought I had the kind of family people envied. Charming, successful, perfectly composed for Christmas cards and country club brunches. My mother was a former beauty queen turned etiquette coach. My father, a respected judge who never raised his voice but could ruin your whole world with one sentence. We weren't a family that talked about feelings. We were a family that framed them and hung them up like diplomas. From an early age, I was labeled the emotional one. Sensitive. Overly expressive. Too much. My older sister, Charlotte, was the golden child. She glided through life in designer shoes and perfect grades. Daddy's favorite. The chosen one. And me? I was the blurry figure in the background of every family photo, always a few steps behind. Still, I tried. I followed the rules. I played the part. Even when it didn't fit. I studied journalism at New York University, not Harvard Law like Charlotte, but I graduated with honors and worked my way up from unpaid internships to lead editor at one of the top online news publications. I had bylines that made national headlines. Features that sparked real conversations. But at every family dinner, I was still introduced as our Riley. She writes blogs. Every holiday, my father would toast Charlotte's latest achievement, her promotion at the firm, her engagement to a venture capitalist, her new penthouse in Atlanta. Meanwhile, I'd get a polite smile and a "still doing that writing thing." That writing thing was read by millions. But not by him. My mother once said, "He just doesn't understand your world." But the truth was, he didn't want to. It didn't fit his mold. And if it didn't fit, it didn't matter. I spent years chasing a nod from the man who could ruin people's lives with a gavel but couldn't find the decency to say, "I'm proud of you," to his own daughter. Then came the cancer diagnosis. Stage 3. Aggressive. And fast-moving. Charlotte flew home immediately. So did I. For once, we were on the same team, trying to keep our father comfortable, organized, in control. But he was still himself. Cold. Distant. Always more appreciative of the nurse who took his vitals than the daughters who sat by his side. 3 months into his treatment, Charlotte left to return to her real life. And I stayed. I ran his errands. Organized his medications. Cleaned out his fridge. Held his hand through chemo and changed his dressings when he couldn't bear to look. I wrote articles on my phone while he napped. Filed stories between his appointments. And still, every time someone visited, he introduced me as the one who works online. The day before his 70th birthday, my mother asked me if I'd prepare a toast. Something light. Something sweet. Something befitting a Southern gentleman. I stood in front of the mirror in the guest room that used to be mine and stared at myself. My face was older, sharper, stronger than I remembered. But my eyes? My eyes were still searching for someone to see me. I wrote something. Practiced it. Memorized the rhythm. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was setting myself up again. That no matter how carefully I chose my words, they wouldn't be enough. Because I had never been enough. Not for him. Not in that house. Not wearing that last name. What I didn't know that night was how far the final cut would go. Or how it would finally set me free. The next evening, I wore navy. Not black, too somber. Not red, too loud. Navy, the color of compromise. My mother greeted guests like she was hosting the governor's ball. Pearls on, smile polished. Charlotte flew in that morning, just in time to walk through the door with perfect hair and a carefully curated bouquet of peonies. Daddy's favorite. "Look who's finally here," he said, with a spark in his tired eyes that hadn't appeared in weeks. I stood in the corner with a glass of wine I didn't drink. Watching. Listening. Rehearsing. My father sat in the grand armchair like a king in his final chapter, thin. Tired. Still in control. His friends, lawyers, politicians, former clerks, all circled like moths around a dying flame. Charlotte gave her toast first. Of course she did. It was fine. Poised. Polished. A little performative. She told a story about how he once helped a stray dog off the highway and then ruled in favor of animal rights a week later. Everyone chuckled. Someone wiped away a tear. And then it was my turn. I stood up and walked to the front of the room with my note cards. I didn't need them. But they were a crutch, something to hold besides my grief. I'm Riley, I said. A few confused faces. A few forced smiles. I'm the one who works online. Laughter. Nervous. Unsure. But my father didn't smile. I've spent my life telling other people's stories. Tonight, I'll just tell you one. And I did. What you may not know is this: when my father was diagnosed with cancer, I moved back home. I gave up months of work, deadlines, opportunities. I stayed. Not because I was expected to, but because I still wanted to believe I could matter to him. My mother stiffened. Charlotte stared down at her champagne. And in those quiet, painful months, I learned something. That you can show up every single day for someone who will never clap when you walk in the room. You can give all of yourself and still be labeled as the one who works online. I looked right at him. His jaw was set. His eyes didn't move. So here's my toast, Daddy. Not to your career. Not to your legacy. But to the truth. I see you. And I hope, wherever your mind drifts at night, you remember the daughter who was never your favorite, but always showed up anyway. Silence. I lifted my glass, then set it down untouched. And I walked away. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. There was no applause. Just a different kind of silence. One that didn't sting. One that felt like a door closing gently behind me. After the party, I didn't go back to the house. I booked a room overlooking the harbor and watched the water ripple under the moonlight. There was peace in the quiet. In the knowing. I received a single text from Charlotte. You didn't have to do that. I didn't reply. Because she was right. I didn't have to. But I needed to. For me. The next morning, I drove to the beach. I stood barefoot in the sand and let the tide reach my toes. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just let go. Because the girl who once begged to be seen was gone. And the woman standing in her place? She wasn't asking anymore. She was claiming. I flew back to New York that Monday morning. The skyline came into view like an old friend. But this time, I didn't return defeated. I returned with fire. Back at the office, my team greeted me with warm smiles and fresh coffee. There were deadlines to meet, features to polish, voices to elevate. I dove into the chaos like I had oxygen to breathe again. No longer heavy with expectation, I was light with purpose. 2 weeks later, an email landed in my inbox. Women in Media Summit, keynote invitation. I read it twice. Then a third time. They wanted me to speak. Not Charlotte. Not someone with a legacy last name or a spotless Southern reputation. Me. The woman who was just writing blogs. The daughter who was always a little too much. And I said yes. Because now, I knew exactly what I needed to say. I took the stage not as someone's daughter, but as my own legacy. The Women in Media Summit was held in Los Angeles, in a room filled with bright lights and brighter minds. Rows of women, students, writers, creators, leaders, sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting to hear stories of resilience and reinvention. And then, it was my turn. I stepped up to the podium, palms warm but steady. My keynote was titled, "The Power of Being Underestimated." I looked out at the crowd and saw my younger self in a dozen faces. When I was growing up, I was told I was too sensitive. Too dramatic. Too much. But none of those things were flaws. They were signals. They were strength, dressed in softness. And when I stopped apologizing for who I was, my voice got louder. And clearer. I told them how I built my career from scratch. How I wrote articles that sparked national dialogue. How I was once introduced at a dinner party as just a blogger, and how that blogger went on to headline a summit filled with women who refused to be invisible. I told them the truth. It's about grief, not from death, but from being invisible all the time. It's about fathers who applaud their sons and extroverted daughters but cannot look their artist daughters in the eye. About the dangerous silence of rejection over and over again until one day you find yourself whispering, "Am I even real?" And then one day, if you're lucky, you whisper back, "Yes." And I always was. When I finished, the hall stood up. They didn't just clap, they cheered. Not for a perfect woman. But for a real woman. This speech went viral. Clips circulated on social media with captions like, "Every girl needs to hear this. Not the girl he wants, but the woman he chooses to be. Stop asking permission to exist." I was invited onto podcasts, panels, radio shows. People shared my story not because it was dramatic, but because it was familiar. It gave words to wounds they hadn't named yet. Months passed. My career grew. My audience doubled. But more than that, my peace grew. I moved into a new apartment in the city. Brighter, more colorful. One entire wall was dedicated to framed covers of my favorite articles, ones I was proud of. No one gave me those frame. I bought them myself. Because celebrating yourself isn't vanity. It's survival. My relationship with my mother remained cautious, like two women navigating a bridge that hadn't been walked in years. But there were soft spots. Shared laughter. And sometimes that's enough. Charlotte and we didn't become best friends overnight. But she started sending me updates about her new apartment, the firm, even dating again. I replied. Slowly. Carefully. Not because I forgot the past. But because I was writing a new chapter, and maybe she had a place in it, eventually. Then, one morning, a simple envelope arrived. No return address. My name written in sharp, deliberate cursive. Inside. A newspaper clipping. Keynote speaker sparks national conversation on gender and visibility in media. Underneath, a sticky note. You were never invisible. I just wasn't looking, Dad. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was honest. And it came too late. And somehow, just in time. I placed the note in a drawer. Not the one filled with old wounds, but a new one. One labeled, Truth. Because healing doesn't mean rewriting the past. It means understanding it, and choosing to live forward anyway. So, if you're reading this, if you've ever been told you were too much, if you've ever sat at a dinner table with people who forgot to pass you the mic, if you've ever waited for someone else to say you're enough, here it is, you are. You always were. About a week later, my father passed away. Just like that, his time was up. We had lost him. And all I could think was, I wish we had shared a healthy father-daughter relationship. I wish I hadn't spent so much of my life trying to prove myself to him. I wish I had been loved unconditionally, not based on achievement or appearance, but just for being me. I wish I hadn't been made to feel like I was only worthy if I lived up to his standards. There were so many what ifs. So many regrets. But the truth was, they were behind me now. That was as close as we ever got. He was the kind of father who could have seen me, if only he had truly looked. And I was the kind of daughter who just wanted to be seen. Yes, I was grieving. But I also understood something important. That was our story. Not the one I hoped for, but the one we had. And now, I'm finally choosing to heal on my own term. But the story didn't end there. After the funeral, we gathered in the house one final time. My father had left something behind for each of us. Most of it, of course, went to Charlotte, just like always. The house legally belonged to my mother, but after her, it would be divided between the two daughters. He left me the library, his shelves full of old leather-bound books, and more importantly, the contents of the room he always kept locked. And then, there was the envelope. I found it in the top drawer of his old writing desk. It had my name on it. Just that, Riley. I locked the study door behind me, lit the old gas lamp beside his chair, and sat down. I expected a letter. Instead, I found a stack of yellowed papers. Dozens of them. At first I didn't understand. But as I read the headers, my breath caught. They were rejection letters, from literary magazines. Lines like, "We read your submission but decided not to move forward. Thank you for your interest, but your piece doesn't fit our current needs. We're going in a different direction." Each one addressed to my father. Each one proof of a dream he'd once chased. He had submitted stories. He had written. He had tried. The dates were from decades ago, his early 20s. He must have kept them hidden all these years, buried in that drawer like the version of himself no one ever really knew. And then I saw it, scrawled in his handwriting on the back of one of the last letters. "You lived the dream I never could. I'm proud of you for that. I was jealous, I'll admit it. I'm sorry, Dad." I broke down sobbing. Ugly, uncontrollable tears, the kind that pour out when grief meets revelation. All this time I thought he didn't see me. But he did. He just didn't know how to say it. In his own quiet, broken way, this was his apology. His confession. His blessing. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like just the emotional one. I felt like a daughter who was finally seen. It came like an embrace. His approval. Just when I no longer needed it. It was almost poetic, really. Life has a strange way of circling back once you've let go. When you stop chasing validation and choose your own strength, that's when it finds you. And it did. My father's quiet confession, buried in the back of a drawer, felt like the softest touch on the shoulder of the little girl inside me. The one who had waited too long to be told she mattered. The one who had finally stopped waiting. I cried. But it wasn't the sharp kind of crying anymore. It was full-bodied. Healing. Cleansing. The kind of tears that signal not pain, but release. Closure. A wound that had been open for 3 decades was finally scabbing over. Soon, even the scab would fall away. And this was the end of mourning. The end of hoping for a different past. When I stepped out of the study, my mother and Charlotte looked at me with concerned eyes. "I'm okay," I said. "In fact, I'm better than I've ever been." I didn't tell them about the letter. I didn't tell them about the stack of rejections. Or the boy he used to be before life hardened him. That part of him was just for me to know. Just as he intended. To them, he'd always be the towering, accomplished man. The revered judge, the Southern patriarch, the legend. But I now carried something more intimate. The truth. I had met the 20-something version of my father. The dreamer, the aspiring writer. The young man who had been told no so many times. That he built a whole life in the opposite direction. He had turned away from art. And toward order. He buried his sensitivity in discipline. He replaced poetry with prestige. But in the end, he left that dream in my hands. And in doing so, he acknowledged the one thing I had needed all along. That he saw me. He admitted his jealousy. And I whispered into the silence of the study, "I forgive you, Dad." And I meant it. Not because he earned it. But because I no longer needed the weight. Forgiveness is not weakness. It's freedom. And I was finally free. Now, I'm more creative than I've ever been. I write, I speak, I get invited. Recently, I was asked to attend a literary festival overseas, my first international event. And guess what? You won't believe it. My mom posted about it on Instagram. Yes, you heard that right. She tagged me. She actually tagged me. Under the event photo, she wrote, "So proud of my daughter." I was in shock. I called Charlotte, and she was laughing. "Yup," she said, "I set up her account. Did you see the other posts? She's basically turned it into a tribute page to us. But the real problem," she added, giggling, "is that she keeps posting those awful childhood photos, like the ones where we're in terrible matching outfits." We both laughed. And then, out of nowhere, Charlotte admitted something that stopped me in my tracks. "You know," she said, "I always loved the way you dressed. You had your own style. Kind of artsy. Cool. I used to try on your clothes when you weren't home. But they never looked right on me. You were bold. Different. People noticed you. And I had to be the boring, popular girl." I couldn't believe it. All those years I thought she had it all together, turns out, she envied me. Later, Charlotte and I met up at a cozy little cafe. We had a lot to talk about, years worth, really. As we sipped our coffee, she looked down at her cup and said quietly, "I spent my whole life trying to be the daughter Dad wanted me to be." Then she glanced up at me, her voice softer now. "And now that he's gone, I don't even know who I am without that." Her words caught me completely off guard. It surprised me, and it broke my heart a little. All this time, I had been so focused on getting revenge. Revenge on my father, and in a way, revenge on Charlotte too. I thought she had it easy. I thought she was the favorite. But the truth? She was trapped in a mold just like I was. While I fought to be seen for who I really was, she spent her life hiding who she really was, just to stay loved. And suddenly, I realized something that changed everything. I had taken my father's legacy and turned it into fuel. But Charlotte had taken it and buried herself beneath it. And I'd never seen it, until now. I didn't want revenge anymore. Not against Charlotte. Not against anyone. Something had shifted. For the first time, I didn't see her as the girl who got everything I did not. I saw her as a woman, tired, lost, and ready to be found. I wanted to help her now. Help her figure out who she really was. Beyond our father's shadow, beyond the expectations she had carried like bricks on her back. I looked her in the eyes and said, "It's not too late, you know. To start fresh. To get to know yourself, on your terms." She smiled. Not the picture-perfect, practiced smile I'd seen 1,000 times. But something different. Something honest. A smile that showed her exhaustion, but also her readiness. In that moment, I knew. She was done hiding. And I was done fighting her. We weren't rivals. We were survivors. And for the first time in our lives, we were finally on the same side. I'm Riley Westbrook. Daughter. Writer. Survivor. Now, I want to ask you. What do you think of my story? If you were in my shoes, what would you have done?